Alright, so we're a few minutes past 6 o'clock, so I guess we'll get started, and I think we might have one or two other people trickle in, but who knows, we won't wait up indefinitely just in case. So thank you all for being here. This is really wonderful. We've had a lot of people express interest in all of our resources, for one thing. I know many of you are acquainted with some of our works and our books here, but we wanted to expand our offering, and I think a lot of folks are just curious naturally about what's online now, and every month it changes. There are new collections being added to these different websites. So we'll provide a very cursory, very broad overview. I mean, we could be here, it could be a 15-week course, we could be here for months and months. So maybe that's going to be the incentive to hold something like this again and to explore different collections, or maybe focus on our archival collections, do different work with some of the books we have around here, including parish records, census records, and so forth. So there's a lot to explore. This is really just the tip of the iceberg. I'm going to do a lot of talking, regrettably, for your sake, I feel for you. But feel free to interrupt anytime. I mean, you can raise your hand if you want, or you can just cut in. I'm not sure if I'll be able to look at everything at the same time, so do feel free to interrupt with questions, since we'll be moving around a little bit. So if you have a question that pops into mind, feel free to interrupt, since by the time we get back to the topic 30 minutes later, it might have passed, might have forgotten about it, and some things might just make sense if I'm able to answer the question in the moment. So don't be shy at all about any of this. As you've seen from either the advertising or the email I sent, we'll give a broad overview of 5 websites, and this is definitely not comprehensive. There's so much more on these 5 different websites, but it's something that will give you a chance to explore further, maybe unlock different aspects of your ancestry. And we'll talk a lot about marriages, particularly because in Quebec, in Acadia, Catholic priests, and many of our ancestors here in the room I know were Catholic, they were very meticulous about writing down baptisms, burials, and definitely marriages as well. And the marriages are kind of the gateway, because typically they will include a parent's or the two parties' parents' names, and therefore you're able to go further back in time and trace their lineage, go to their parents and the generation before them, and so forth. So that's kind of the focus and the agenda we have for tonight. And again, feel free to interrupt any time. But I'd love to hear from you what your interests are. So since I'm very excited to have you, and this is kind of your space and your time to ask questions as well, I'd love for us to go around the table, maybe introduce ourselves, and maybe talk a little bit very briefly about our genealogical interests. Like, what are you focusing on, and what do you want to learn? So can you start here?
Oh, first one?
Yeah.
Well, I remember going, and I know that they wanted to get it from Nova Scotia, because I went to Louisiana a few years ago, and I went to the museum center. They had 3 walls of all the recorded families with the date and the ship they were on. It's unbelievable. And I didn't see any Bourgoins there. So I'm just interested. I know they're from France somewhere,
Yeah.
but how they got up here, I don't know.
Great. Thank you. Yeah. Great.
Français, anglais?
Either one? Either or not?
Je vais aller avec l'anglais. I've been interested in genealogy for a long time, and I've done research in spurts. Every now and then I just need to find out something about a relative, and so I've explored different. I've had a membership in the Ancestry as a gift from my family, and I've enjoyed that, and I've let it go because I didn't have time to pursue it at the time. But now I'm interested in the site that you're going to show us.
Sure.
And I'm excited they're free ones.
Yeah. Sure.
But I have done work with, like I was telling you earlier, with the d'origine québécoise.
Mm-hmm.
And I found out a lot of nice things because my families, on both sides, were from Canada.
Yeah. Sounds good.
I'm originally from here. I've been away for 50 years. And because of her, I'm getting an interest in hereditary and where we come from. But I grew up here, went to college here, and I'm back.
That's great. That's wonderful.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Hi, my name's Rebecca. So I've done genealogy with Patrick's helps for both sides of my family, and I'm just wanting to learn about more resources so that maybe I can do a deeper dive and learn more about some family members. So that's why I'm here.
Well, my name is Don Raymond, and I know nothing about genealogy, and I'm here to learn about the process. Where do you start? And I've already had an introduction to the process. When Patrick said in his introduction, he said you start with the immediate, and because of marriages you can work your way back. Now that's the process that I'm interested in.
Thank you.
My name is Madeline. For those of you who don't know me, I work here at the Archives with Patrick, so I'm helping facilitate the event.
Dan's my name, from Madawaska, and both sides of my family are from Canada, obviously. I was introduced to ancestry information from my second cousin out in Alberta about 2 years ago. And she let me use her ancestry.com and so on and so forth. I started, then summertime came and I didn't work in the house in summertime, I was outside. So winter's coming and that's gonna be my winter project.
Terrific. That's great news.
And I kind of like, in your email, you gave a half a dozen other sites to look at.
Yeah.
And I was looking forward to learning that.
Terrific. Thanks. Good.
Bonsoir, je suis Sco, et mon français est mal.
Shouldn't speak English because I don't understand.
Runаю Latvitsky.
Practice.
Okay. So, my name is Scott. I teach here at UMFK. I'm juggling two different types of ancestry here, if you will. I've been interested. I'm the grand old man of my family. Don't ask, but I am. So my mother's family is from Poland. My father's family is from Latvia. And I can trace the family so far back in Poland that they're from what is now Slovakia, not even Poland. The Latvian family I have a big problem with. But part of the reason that I'm here is because both Patrick and Madeline have helped me trace. My middle daughter married a local boy. So I hope you understand my sense of humor. I'm probably related to half of the St. John Valley now. Because he comes from Tardif and Bernier. And we've done a lot of tracing of those lines. So I'm interested in tracing the Franco-American lines for my grandson who lives in Bangor.
My name is Dana, and I feel like I've been doing ancestry for a long time. My mom started in the 70s and 80s by sending away for birth certificates and taking photos and preserving everything. And back then, you had to actually call the town or the city offices and get things sent, and it cost a lot of money. It was $5 or $10 per certificate. So she kind of started me on this journey. She's talking about her family, and my mother's mom was 100% Italian. My mother's dad is. It's funny. She always growing up said Yugoslavia, and then it was Slovenia, and if you go far enough back, it's Austria-Hungary. Probably the same thing you're dealing with, Scott. So she's like, no, my family was not from Austria. I'm like, back up, Mom. A long time ago, it was. So that's Mom's side. Dad's side is grandmother 100% Italian again, and grandfather 100% Irish. So Italian and Slovenian are harder to find on the records. I've gone back 2 generations there, I think. I'm on the verge of a 4th generation on one of my great grandparents, which I'm really excited about on the Italian side. However, I know I'm talking too long. My husband, his mother was born in the house we live in St. John Plantation, and they were O'Learys. And so O'Leary and Jackson are in his mother's side and on her father's side. So that side of the family came from Canada, came from Restigouche, New Brunswick, I believe I'm pronouncing that correctly. We have 2 generations back from his great-grandfather. But some of the lines, if you trace them far enough back on his great-grandmother's side, go back to the Mayflower. So we're pretty excited about finding all that. And once you found a certain ancestor, it just kind of flew from there to the Mayflower. And because everything's already inserted into Ancestry. So, and then back to England and wherever they were before that. So his family is looking pretty good, at least in that one side. But my family, I struggle with. Last thing, I have an interest in writing a book about my Italian grandfathers, my mom's side, because he had a tavern in Duluth, Minnesota during Prohibition. So I want to write a book about that whole, it's going to have to do a lot of fill in the blanks, but I'm trying to find as much information as I possibly can. So looking for access to newspapers and things that I would find articles about the family in. So that's where I'm headed. Thanks for listening.
Get a full docket.
Yeah.
It's going to keep you busy for
Wow.
at least for a few weeks,
Wow,
I'd say.
yeah.
Well, terrific. I'm excited. A lot of what we're going to cover tonight is tied to Quebec, specifically the province of Quebec. And I'm heartened to hear names like Pelletier, Fortin, Soucy, Michaud, Bourgoin, Raymond. All those come from Quebec, so there's going to be a lot in common that we can apply here. Thibodeau is an Acadian name. And I'll offer a few sources about Acadia, some of which are available online. It's very difficult with Acadia, partly because there are immense gaps in the historical record and genealogical record. Even before the deportation, there are very few Catholic missionaries going around and recording marriages or any sacraments they may have performed. Then we have the huge gap following the deportation, where some of these deportees are immersed in Protestant environments, and we kind of lose sight of some of these families until in some cases, they return to Nova Scotia, return to New Brunswick, or repatriate to Quebec, and then we have a bigger record, and that's usually in the latter few years of the 18th century, until they become kind of institutionalized within the Catholic Church, because then again, their Catholic priests are very meticulous about keeping records. So that's why it's so difficult, and we're very thankful for the genealogical dictionary of Stephen White, who covers some of the first decades. So if you're interested in pursuing that a little bit further, the Acadian roots, we have leads at least. It's not a perfect record, but to the extent that it exists, we can point you in the right direction. So we're going to talk first about Nos Origines. Rita mentioned that just a moment ago. It's a perfect website. Not perfect. We're going to talk about some of the pitfalls, I suppose, or some of the limitations to using that website. But first I want to share a few things, just a few bare basics about genealogy in Quebec. We'll start with this one. So D-names. Some of you might be familiar with the concept of D-names. A lot of the first pioneers who came from France and settled in New France had, of course, a surname that they brought with them. But oftentimes, within the first generation, they acquire a nickname or a new surname, and they become known it might be Joseph Arpin, and then he'll be known in the colony as Potvin. And sometimes it's very hard to trace exactly where some of these nicknames come from, partly because there are very few sources explaining, like first-person narratives explaining why a person might have adopted a nickname. Oftentimes they're based on personal traits. an occupation, a place where they may have lived. And we suspect that these surnames arise because there are 5 different Pelletier families in the same town. So which Pelletiers do you belong to? Well, I'm, the Pelletiers from the intersection, so les Pelletiers de la Croix. So that might be a surname that arises, and that's just an example. I don't know of any who would have been known that way.
In our area, I'm married to Kelsey. She's a Kelsey. And il y a les Pelletiers d'un début.
Okay.
And I often wondered if they were okay, that they weren't very nice people, but that wasn't the case. It's because they came there with oxen.
Okay.
And so c'est les petits d'un début, whereas les autres c'est les petits des damas. Les autres c'est les petits des boudons. I don't know why boudon. I never figured that one out. But anyway.
Yeah.
I didn't mean to interrupt you,
No,
I just had to say it.
Those are great examples. So
Yeah.
that might be the very reason why some of these nicknames arise. And over the course of a few generations, some families just become known for their surname. And that's the name that gets passed down, not the original name that they brought from France. So these are a few examples. And I mentioned some of these partly because when you're doing research and you know that your ancestor might have been a La Rochelle, well, you might also want to search for the original name if you can't find them under La Rochelle. Maybe originally they were known as Gotron. So these are all examples. These are pretty common. Nearly all of the Boisvert in Quebec were originally de Nevers, which is a pretty common name. Here in this region, there are different lines of Beaulieu, and a lot of the Beaulieu's that we do have in our region were Hudon originally. So you go back to Quebec, you go back to the 17th century, that's the name you have to look for. And this is far from a comprehensive list, this is just a dozen. In reality, there's some demographers and researchers who found thousands of such cases of Z names. So I don't know if there is a comprehensive list that exists anywhere. It's something that you develop from doing a lot of research over the course of time. But there are a few websites still. If you Google Quebec Z names examples, you'll find a lot of those. So all that to say that, and we have a lot of others in our region as well. Mivids, Deschênes is pretty common. And this is the Quebec spelling of Deschênes that we have on the right. In our region we have different spellings.
With an A-I-M-E.
Yeah.
Often.
Yeah, that's right. And you'll notice there are a few commonalities to the names, the Z names, the surnames. In the second column, you have La Pointe, La Rochelle, L'Allemand, La Tulipe. So it's designating something. La Tulipe is the tulip. La Pointe, the point. So they might have been living on a point of land. You also see Beaulieu, Beauregard, Deschênes. People come from, I don't know what chêne is in English. I should know my trees better, but it's a type of tree.
Oak.
Oak. So they might have lived near, an oak grove. Desjardins, of the gardens. So there's a commonality there where it designates something. Something that's oftentimes much more tangible or real than the original surname that they had in France. Yeah. So that's something to look out for. And then I'll also mention this really quickly in passing, the anglicization of names. We know that between 1840 and 1930, about 1 million French Canadians leave Quebec to live permanently in the States. That's not counting all those who stayed here temporarily before returning to Quebec. So we call that La Grande Saignée, the Great Hemorrhage. It was a demographic hemorrhage towards the United States. And in the course of that, a lot of the names were anglicized, as you might suspect, especially in the early generations. Yeah, so we see, these are just a few examples that I've seen from census records, and oftentimes it's phonetic.
Yeah.
So Damas becomes Thomas, Ignace, Ines, Jean-Baptiste. The moment you see a John with a French surname in American census records, it's probably Jean-Baptiste originally. Louise, I haven't seen it much under Louisa, it's typically Eliza for some reason. Philomene, Amanda, again there's that slight phonetic similarity. And then I've seen so many of my ancestors who moved to the US, whatever their first name was, if they were a woman, she becomes Mary. And I don't know if it's like American census takers or...
Is it because they had, oftentimes they have been Marie, Louise or Marie,
It could be. I mean,
Like, take a boy, for instance, a guy, who had Joseph many times because when they were baptized, if it wasn't a religious name, they'd add
Yeah.
Marie or Joseph.
That's true.
That could be why we have so many Marys.
Yeah, that's true. And yet sometimes we find them in Canadian census records under a different name. It might have been, Marguerite. And yet in the U.S., it's Mary. And I don't know if it's just from the struggle communicating with the enumerator, the census enumerator, or the English-speaking enumerator not making the effort necessarily, just hearing a strange French name and being like, I think she said Mary. I don't know exactly, but we do see that a lot. And then we see that also with last names. Baker, the actual French name is boulanger, for somebody who bakes. And yet we see maybe it's just enough of a similarity in terms of like how the word is pronounced that Bélanger also becomes baker. Yeah, so we have a few examples of that. Boivin, Greenwood, a lot of my ancestors or relatives became crosses. There are a few places in Maine where we have bishops. The poet Jim Bishop lives in Old Town. A generation back, his family was all Levites. And it's just from moving down, working in the mills, and sometimes you needed an English surname to work in the mills. So that explains part of it. Pinette and Spruce. Tabitha Spruce, wife of Stephen King. Going back a few generations, they're Pinettes. And we think they were from Aroostook County. And Hawaiian King, of course. So if you're Greenwoods, you might go back 2 generations to find that they're Boivin, and then go back 3 generations and it's the Nevaeh. So the name can change 3 or 4 times over the course of about 10 generations in the case of French Canadians, all depending on where they were living.
The Leblanc became brown.
Yeah.
Leblanc became white. That's terrible.
Yeah.
They lost their name.
Yeah, that's true. And that's the case, I think, with Stephen White, actually, the genealogist. A few generations back, he's Acadian. He was Leblanc. So these are just a few examples to kind of share the pitfalls of doing research. It's always kind of a challenge. So we'll go back here to Nos Origines. And this is, if you just go to the website nosorigines.qc.ca, get the French version. As far as I can tell, if you click on English, you're going to get roughly the same interface. Suddenly there's a maple leaf instead of the fleur de lis. But as far as I can tell, the research function or the search function in the website yields the same result regardless of whether it's French or English. So we'll do an example. Let's do, and it's last name, first name. Let's do a random search for a Pierre Deschênes, and I suspect there will be quite a few. And there are. And the great thing with Nos Origines is that it automatically sorts all of the search results chronologically based on when they lived. So if you have an ancestor who's named Pierre Deschênes, and you think, oh, well, he was probably born in the 1850s, but I don't have an exact date, at least you can scroll down really quickly to find somebody who would have been born around that time. And here I'll go back so you can see the headings here. So you have gender, and that's a piece that hasn't been translated, so it's H for meaning man, and I suspect that it's F for femme, for women. Then we have the name, the parents, and this is all based on marriage records that have been individually typed into the website. Part of it is user-generated, so sometimes there will be errors, but overwhelmingly I've used the site a lot, and part of what I'm sharing today is like verifying sources, so we'll talk a little bit about that. But typically it's a very reliable website, partly because there are a lot of eyes on the site, and the moment that there's a correction to be made, somebody points it out, and it is made. And usually people supply the source also to make sure that future researchers are on the headed in the right direction. Then when available, born, and when they were born, when they died, their spouse, and we'll click on one of these in just a moment, and the parents of the spouse. So even just within the search results, you can gather a lot of information from Nos Origines. So let's choose one. let's go with this one. I see that there's a Miville and a Lévesque in the family tree, so that connects with our region to a certain extent. So just scroll down here just so we avoid all the ads. Always get in the way. So you'll have his profile on the left, her profile on the right. You can also, I put in a man's name, you can also search by women, in which case it'll be, the search results, or sorry, the profile pages won't be flipped, but the search results on the prior page will be flipped, so it will be organized by the women you searched for. So you see their respective parents at the top. So Pierre Deschaines, that's something we talked about just a moment ago. You see that his father, his last name is Jean-Baptiste Miville. So that's a generation where it flips. So his last name is Miville, and perhaps that his nickname in life was Deschaines, and people knew him as such, although in church records he was still known as Miville, according to the parish priest. Or it might have been the next generation. Maybe Pierre was baptized as a Miville, and then over the course of his lifetime he just decided, from now on we're Deschaines. We're known as Deschaines, we'll just adopt that moniker, that surname. And then we have his spouse, Delvina Bouchard, her parents, and their additional notes as well. Here it says, and I'll translate, Il sera Alfred Deschaines lors de son mariage et à la naissance de ses enfants. Somebody did the research on the family and say, even though originally he was known as Pierre Deschaines, at the time of his marriage and when his children were born, we find him in church records as Alfred. So it might just be that he was baptized as Pierre Alfred, and he just chose Alfred to be known as in his adult life. And then the great thing about this is that all these links are clickable, so you can click on Jean-Baptiste Miville, and then you'll have the exact same setup. These are Pierre Deschaines or Alfred Deschaines' parents, and then his grandparents at the top. If we go back to Pierre's profile, we have his marriage, right in the middle, married in 1870, and we have some of their children. Very often these are not comprehensive. Again, this is user generated, so it's information that people have provided. So don't assume that if there are only 4 children, that they only have 4 children. There may be others that haven't been added to the website. But this is a quick way of accessing a marriage date, and then once you have a marriage date, you can look up the original record. And so the next step for us, once we've found what we think is the right person and the marriage record, or a date of marriage, is to go to the original source. And that's what we're all about here. We want to provide the original sources. Oftentimes online, and this is kind of the big challenge with online information, is that we don't have a documentary source. People upload information and there's no way to verify it. We don't know where to go to find the original documents. So that's what we're going to share in part tonight. So one good way of doing that, if you want to make sure that this information here, which I'll highlight, if you want to make sure that this is correct, there are a few places you can go. You can search it on ancestry.com. I'll show you a way of doing so on Family Search, since Family Search is free. So it'll be easily accessible. But I do want to mention that Ancestry, as you may have seen from the email, is free and accessible on-site here on campus. So if there's something you can't find on other databases, come right in and it will help you find it on ancestry.com. So we have a marriage here for this Pierre Deschaines, married allegedly, at least according to this site, at Ligevecht, which is not too far from here in Quebec, along the St. Lawrence River, February 28, 1870. So we'll go to Family Search. So all I did here, coming to Family Search, I logged in using my credentials, and this is the page it brought me to. And anyone can sign up, it's free. I think they just want to make sure that people do sign up, that they're able to track the people who are using the website for all sorts of good reasons. But this is what it brings you to.
That's a Family Search?
Yeah,
familysearch.org.
Okay.
And it's very tempting with Family Search and Ancestry to just go straight for these boxes right here. To do search for an ancestor. Usually that's the first thing that pops up. But we're going to do something a little bit different, because you could write Pierre Deschaines here, and you could have 100 results, some of which are terrible, some of which aren't from Ligevecht, some of which might be from Massachusetts or some other place. So there's a way that's potentially a little bit faster to locate exactly their marriage record, he and Delvina Bouchard in Quebec. So, the best way to do this, if you click on Search at the top, that's a drop-down menu. And then you can click on the first option, Records. So again, you have this beautiful search bar that we're going to ignore, at least for now. And you're, of course, welcome to use that. What I would recommend whenever you use these search fields at the top in Ancestry, on the Ancestry homepage, on Family Search, is don't make the search terms too narrow. So sometimes if you have a lot of information about a person already, you might say, oh, his name was Pierre Deschênes, he was born in 1850, he died in 1912, he lived in Quebec. You might be inclined to enter as much information as possible. But that means that when the site searches for its records, if there isn't an exact match that meets all those criteria, it's just going to eliminate them. So if you've entered something incorrectly, or if there isn't enough information about the person, he might not or she might not show up in the search results. So start broadly, and then if you see that you have 10,000 hits, then start narrowing, instead of starting very narrow and being like, he's not on here, or she's not on here. So we're going to set that aside for just a moment, since this is pretty self-explanatory, pretty user-friendly. We'll go down to Find a Collection here. And we're going to type in Quebec, since we know that our friend Pierre or Alfred Deschênes married in Quebec. You'll see all the collections here that relate to Quebec. And the one we want to access is the second one from the top that covers more than 300 years of history and genealogical data. So from the moment that church records opened in 1621 up until the 1970s, although I will say from 1940 onwards, it drops off considerably. So it's not all parishes that have records leading up to 1979. Once you get past 1940, it's very light. And I think part of that is just due to the fact that a lot of dioceses and parishes have been reluctant to share information about people who are still living. So it's partly about confidentiality and privacy reasons. But regardless, we're going to click on this one. And then we're going to ignore that beautiful search bar. We're going to click on Browse those almost 1.4 million images. And then you have all the parishes. Yeah, so a lot of familiar names from all across Quebec. It's a lot. Now, if I look for, and it's in alphabetical order, I'll try not to make you too dizzy here. So, normally, Ilvert would be somewhere in here, or maybe, since it's ISL, just somewhere around here, and it's not there. It doesn't mean it doesn't exist. So, what I love doing is Control F, or do Find on the page, and then for some reason I can't find it alphabetically. I'll just put Ilvert here. Oh, so there I have two hits. There's a parish called Saint-Jean-Baptiste de l'Ilvert, and then what is the other one? Notre-Dame de l'Ilvert. So at least we know there are two parishes, and it's not clear from nos origines which parish he married in. So I'll gamble, I'll click on Notre-Dame de l'Ilvert, and then there's only one option. It's the parish of Notre-Dame des Sept Douleurs. And then that's not going to help us a whole lot, because as we saw earlier, he was married in 1870. So at least as far as the parish of Notre-Dame, there wouldn't be anything since it starts in 1876. So we'll go back. Go back here. So this is where we have all the parishes. So the other one was Saint-Jean-Baptiste de l'Ilvert. So click on that one. And then there's only one parish. And this gives us a much larger spread. It also leads up to 1880, but it starts in the 1760s. So somewhere in there should be the marriage record for our Pierre Deschênes. And you just have to look at the dates here. It would probably be somewhere in this collection of records. I will say also that We'll talk about this a little bit later. A lot of this information is also on ancestry, but the images, for whatever reason, are of much higher quality and much higher resolution on Family Search. So if you're more familiar with Ancestry, you can search it on Ancestry, and then you get to the actual image. It's not great. You can find it here, if that's more helpful. So we know that the marriage occurred in 1870, and unfortunately this will require a little bit of finagling because there are 267 images in the collection, but typically they're in chronological order. So if the collection runs from 1868 to 1876, as we saw just a moment ago, it should be pretty early on. So I'm just going to type in, let's see if page 70 is close to what we're looking for. And I will blow this up, I promise, make this much bigger. And this says, Le 4 avril, April 4th, 1870, I think that's 1870, so we might have the right year. And then Pierre Deschênes was married on February 28th, if I remember correctly. Yes. So let's see where we are here. That's April. So we'll go back a little bit. We're in the right year. That's February 22nd. And, oh, what do I see here? Here we have Alfred Deschênes. And it does say February 28th. So I should have offered this disclaimer. All this is going to be in French. So FYI, if you're doing research on Quebec parish records. So, and oftentimes what we tell our students who are helping us here at the archives is that it's really, there are two elements of translation. One is the language itself, and then the second part is this, 19th century cursive, or 18th century cursive, or 17th century cursive. So I've gotten pretty good from doing this for many, many years. Some of it might be the way some of you learn to write in cursive, but we're always happy to help if there are words that are hard to decipher. We're happy to help. And what I should add also is that with all these acts, whether it's baptismal, marriage, or burial records, there's a clear form to it. And the priests know these forms by heart, so every act will have basically the same ingredients, if you will, the same pieces of information. It's going to be the same words from one act to the next. So what changes is occupations, names, witnesses, dates. Otherwise, like once you've known where to find the information within the act, typically it's easy to fill the blanks. So we're able to confirm what Nos Origines said from having seen this. So it does say le 28 février, February 28, 1870. I'll translate really quickly. After the publication of 3 banns of marriage, that was fait au pont done during our parish masses between Alfred Deschênes, cultivateur, farmer, cultivator. And this is important. So, like on Nos Origines, we found the date and the place, and that's all the information we have. If you go to the original source, for one thing, you can confirm what some random person entered online, but there's more information. So here you have the occupation, and it says de Saint-Alexandre. So even though he married in L'Île Verte, he was from the parish of Saint-Alexandre in Kamouraska. It says that he is fils majeur, so the adult son of Jean-Baptiste Deschênes, which is interesting because in Nos Origines it said Jean-Baptiste Miville. So at least as far as his son is concerned, or the parish priest here, he says, maybe it's Miville, but we know him as Deschênes. So they enter the father's name as Deschênes. It gives the mother as well, Angèle Lévesque, also of Saint-Alexandre. And I can probably make this even a little bit bigger for your sake. And then they mention the spouse, Delvina Bouchard, of this parish. So that's why they get married in L'Île Verte. The bride is from L'Île Verte. Adult daughter of Feu is something you're going to see a lot in Quebec church records. Feu means deceased or the late. So she is the daughter of the late Pierre Bouchard. En son vivant, when he was living, he was a cultivator. And of Feu, also deceased, Domitil Gagnon. So both of her parents are passed away at this point. And then it continues on the next page.
Wow.
And I'll just have to find it here, at the top, a little bit further up. So it continues here. As per the certificate of Monsieur le Curé, the pastor of the parish, and this n'a découvert aucun empêchement, there have been no objections or challenges to the marriage, and then it goes on with a lot of kind of rote formulas from the Catholic Church, and it mentions the witnesses, and the witnesses can be very helpful in terms of figuring out who they're related to and who matters in their lives, who have they chosen to be their witnesses. And it usually ends with signatures. Here we have a signature, and it says PTRE, which is short for prêtre. So we know that this is the parish priest who signed. It says, at first I thought it was Hippolyte. Léopold. Yeah, Léopold Boutin. And again, typically you would see signatures, at least when you get to the late 19th century, early 20th century. But literacy rates being what they were in early or mid 19th century Quebec, sometimes you just have no signatures whatsoever, except for the parish priest. So here it says they were in the presence of Joseph Deschênes and many other friends qui n'ont pu signer, who were unable to sign the act. So that's one example. One way of finding information is, it's great to have the dates and the places, and that's kind of the skeleton, and it's fine to go to Nos Origines and draft out the skeleton, but then you have so much more information by going deeper and accessing the original source. And it's great because these we don't have physically, for the most part, here at the archives, but now they're available to the entire world. So you can go find that information, and you could do this for every single one of your ancestors. So that's a great starting point. I've been talking a lot. Let's pause. Are there questions?
Backtrack with a really
Yes.
simple question.
Sure.
To avoid my high blood pressure. When you were doing the search on Family Search that
Yeah.
you wanted us to do,
Yeah.
the key commands,
Oh, let me just go back here.
because I can see my laptop going through the window without knowing those key commands.
So meaning finding like the parish on this page?
Yeah. I think that's what. Yep.
Yeah. So with most computers, I think you can do Control F, and then you have that little box,
Okay.
and then
Control Alt F or Control F?
just Control F.
Okay.
Yeah. That's probably the easiest way of doing it.
Okay.
And that way, I mean, it's true in some cases, it's not clear whether it's the parish or the town in which the parish is located, and sometimes you have both. So it's worth, for instance, we have Sainte-Anne-de-Sorel right here. Well, Sorel is the town, and it has a parish called Sainte-Anne-de-Sorel. But in some cases you have Mensonville. Mensonville is a town. So it's a mix of both, and I'm not sure that there's rhyme to the...
So again, to get to the cities and towns, that was, if you go back to the original, like just regular Family Search.
Yeah.
And then what we want to browse the images.
That's right.
Correct. And this is where we would hit the Control F.
Yeah.
Okay. Got it.
And it's worth, I mean, there's a good chance it will show up whatever place you're looking for alphabetically. Other questions?
I'm really glad you showed me this.
Glad.
I've already found.
Oh yeah, very good. Yeah, you've been clicking around. So I should mention, while we're on Family Search, I'll just go back here to the home. I guess it is the home page once you've logged in. Here I entered Quebec just a moment ago to see everything that was related to Quebec within Family Search. But you can do Maine. So if you're not sure if your family ever lived in Quebec, or just focus on branches that lived in Maine, there is a lot here. You have a few for Aroostook County, deed books, probate records, and there's no promise that these are comprehensive. So it might just be from a few towns or a few locations, but it's worth looking these up. We have church records, Civil War enlistment papers, crews, deaths and burials, cemeteries, more probate, a little bit of everything. So the Maine collections are much more comprehensive and extensive than the ones from Quebec. So those are worth checking out. And at least it narrows, again, the focus of your research. All right. So let's talk a little bit about ancestry, now that we've talked about a few other sites. So the version we use here on campus is the Ancestry Library, and that's just what we have to buy to be able to accommodate a lot of people who use it. That's our subscription price point, if you will. But the interface will be very similar if you do decide to buy a subscription, or if you have one. I think, Dana, you have one, is that possible? So I suspect that it looks almost exactly like this. It won't say University of Maine at the top. But typically the collections you're able to access, even if the formatting is a little bit different, are the same, whether you're accessing it here or at home. The difference is with Ancestry Library, because it's used by a lot of patrons, you won't be able to create your own family tree on Ancestry. A lot of people want to do that. I'll suggest an alternative towards the end of this presentation to creating your family tree on this site. There are other sites where you can do that and have better functionalities, but you can still access all the same collections. One thing I want to perhaps ward you away from, let's try that again. Phew, okay. Sometimes it does that, sometimes it's a little bit slow and it has trouble pinging the website. One thing I do want to mention is if you search for somebody, anyone here, the difference between the library edition, which we have here, and what you might have at home, is how the search results are going to pop up. So here you're going to have a lot of really worthwhile hits. You have some from the Drouin collection, which we're going to talk about. Quebec, Canada, Vital Church Records, we often know that as the Drouin collection. So you see a lot of different Pierre Miville's Deschênes, or Miville, or simply Deschênes, from some of these parishes not too far from here. Again, it's kind of the heartland of the Miville / Deschênes families. But oftentimes what you're going to have at home is right at the top you're going to have a suggested profile if you search. And one way of finding them here is with that last link under filters, under family trees. If you click on that, those are family trees that people have created on the website.
Did you go to all collections in the search?
No, not yet,
Okay.
but that may come.
Okay.
So here.
Where are you right now? I'm so sorry.
Oh, no, that's okay. I'll just go back here. So I just entered, if you search terms, Pierre Deschênes,
Oh, gotcha.
in the main search bar. Just to give one quick example. And then we have a lot of different hits that could potentially be relevant to whoever you're searching for. But then I clicked on family trees, and this is the part that's user generated. It's not the site, it's not Ancestry or genealogical associations uploading material and making it more findable or searchable. It's users, which is both great and sometimes very problematic. So you might see that there's a Pierre Deschênes here, who died in 2016. I'm just going to click on him. It says birth unknown, death August 2016. It does say that it does give death dates for his parents. As you see, there are no sources whatsoever. And we can click on his father, we'll see what turns up. I'm going into this kind of blindly. And here, so we have a few more elements to his biography, and some people have connected sources in this case. And they're also from the Drouin collection. The Drouin collection, again, is mostly collections of births or baptisms, more specifically, marriages and burials from the Quebec Catholic Church. So some of this seems to be substantiated, and if you click on one of these, it's going to show what it's related to. So this is pretty good. I was afraid that I'd click on one. I mean, both are good in terms of showing you what's out there and what's sometimes problematic, but at least this person who created the profile decided to substantiate everything by providing sources. And one of the reasons I point that out is oftentimes Madeline and I will have patrons who come in and they ask us, they look at this and they're like, oh, perfect, I never knew about this person, just print it out for me. And sometimes there are no sources. And we do our best to, to temper that excitement, be like, yes, there's potentially good information in here, but there's nothing to support it. So it could be somebody working from memory. It could be somebody who just inherited a set of pieces of paper. We don't know where the information is coming from, and it's something that deserves to be verified. So it's good to go on this, use this as a starting point, but it should never be the end point, at least until you click on the source and you're able to verify the information for yourself. And I'm not going to go too far into this. I think it's this this act or this record specifically. But it does provide me with the opportunity to mention really quickly that here you have back-to-back baptisms, and the wording is almost exactly the same. So once you know the wording within the acts, even if French is not your first language or your dominant language, you can still make it out. And we can provide you with basically a translation of what the French words mean, and then you can just fill in the boxes for those of you who, again, might not be as cognizant of French. So that's one thing really worth checking out as well. I'll go back to something that you mentioned in passing, Dana, just a moment ago. I'm going to go back to the Ancestry homepage to do collection search, just to give you a sense of what's available on Ancestry that can be helpful to us. Click on search here. Okay, so again, it's very easy to use the search bar here, the search function. We'll do something a little bit more specific here, and I want to make you aware of some of the collections, church collections that might be relevant to our area in northern Maine. So you'll see on the right-hand side, you have Explore by Collection. I should use my cursor here, right there. And we're going to click on View All. And that's basically the Ancestry version of what we just did with Family Search, of looking at separate collections. And what you can do here is do Drouin. So that's a collection I mentioned earlier. And with Drouin, you won't only have Quebec. It's interesting. I don't know if it had a sense that you were coming, Scott.
What's with this Liepaja, Latvia Jewish cemetery burials? I mean, this is creepy.
Yeah, you spent time there, right?
Yeah. I know where the Jewish cemetery is in Liepaja, Latvia.
Wow.
Yeah.
There you go. You'll have to come back, and it'll keep you busy for some time. So just to focus on, again, kind of Quebec church records and those marriages, we're going to enter Drouin, and there's a lot that we can go on there. So,
Is that a last name or a location?
Drouin is the name of the person who created the collection initially. So even if you go to local genealogical societies in Quebec, the lesser equivalents of the Acadian Archives, you'll be able to ask for Drouin, and they'll know exactly what you mean. Yeah. So you'll see that this is the one that we were using just a moment ago. And this one has 34 million records. Yeah. And that's just about as comprehensive as you can get in terms of any collection in Quebec. So think about the family stories, the relationships, the professions, occupations, everything else that's buried in all these records that you would never get just from looking at Nos Origines, where you have the 10,000-foot view, but it doesn't go into details to even find an ancestor's signature, which I think alone is pretty cool, just to see how they wrote their names. Or in the case of, I've noticed with men in particular, just how scribbly, scratchy, poorly written, and I don't know if it's from having like cold, calloused hands from working in the fields and like having vice-like grips if they were, or maybe it's just like limited education. I don't know exactly, but it's neat to see those signatures. So that's an important one for Quebec specifically. There are two more that might interest us. U.S. French Catholic records here at the top, and Acadia, Canada, vital and church records. And all these get lumped into Drouin, but they are geographically separated. So I'm going to click on a few of these just to show you what you can potentially access. We're going to start with the one at the top, U.S. French Catholic Church records. And then you can again browse this collection. And in this case, you have records from different places around the U.S. So if I click on D, we'll have, then I have to click on location. You have different parishes from Detroit. But luckily they also have collections from northern Maine. If I click on F, you have Frenchville. So a lot of you might be used to using some of these books here in person. This is actually Van Buren, but we have a lot of church compilations. And these are basically indexes. Somebody has gone through every single act in a certain parish register to figure out who the person's parents were, to identify all the baptisms, all the marriages, and so forth. So it's neat to have these compilations. It's a good starting point, and these are very reliable. They've been proofread, and they've been amply used at this point. A lot of people, if there were any small mistakes, they've been corrected to a certain extent. But that's only an index. Again, it doesn't give you the original source. But here in Drouin, the U.S. French Catholic Church records, you do have the original records. So here for Frenchville, they have marriages starting in 1910. Although I think if you click on this option right there, that's not Frenchville marriages, you'll be able to access records further back, going as far back as 1843, when the church records or the church opens meaningfully. We'll just click on this to give you an example. Quality of the writing. I mean, the writing is great. The image sometimes is a little bit harder to decipher, but you can still make it out. Le 7 janvier 1843, January 7th, 1843, nous signé prêtre, we undersigned father or priest. So you can kind of make it out, and you see that this is a Ouellet family. So again, you can find all these records online for Frenchville. You can also do that for Van Buren. So on this side of the river, Frenchville and Van Buren are the oldest parishes. So you can go back to, I think in the case of Van Buren, possibly the 1830s. Yeah, 1838. So again, what we have here in terms of physical collections, indexes, compilations, that's the tiniest tip of the iceberg. You can access the original sources online on Ancestry. So there is one parish in the valley that's older than Van Buren and Frenchville, and that's Saint-Basile, on the other side of the river. So for that one, it wouldn't be under U.S. French Catholic records. You would have to go back, and it would be under Acadia. So New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, and Prince Edward Island parish records would be under this rubric. And then there are parishes from all over the place. We won't go through all of these, but I do want to point out Saint-Basile, which is right here, with records going as far back as the 1790s. Yeah.
Get a nice golf course.
That's all from the Catholic Church did all that?
That's right.
Amazing.
It is.
Amazing.
Yeah. So,
It's in the rock for the world.
yeah. So 1792, I'll just go ahead here. And this is a later transcription, I can tell by the writing. So at some point, they decided to move the information out of the original parish registers to a new format. I don't know if the original ones were slowly disintegrating or weren't in great quality, or they just wanted to have a duplicate. to send to the government for official civil records or vital records. This is definitely not writing from the 1790s, maybe later 19th century. But yeah, you have records that's going back more than 200 years for this region specifically. So, and I suspect that some of you have family in this region settling as early as the early 19th century. So a lot of that information is hidden away in some of these records online. There's something else I do want to share. We're kind of running out of time very quickly, and I appreciate your patience and just being attentive. But I'll go back to the Ancestry card catalog. And again, I'll just retrace my steps here just so we're all on the same page. So once you click on search, you can choose by collection. So I'll go back to view all. And then I'll put in notarial. Oh, I'll try to spell it properly. There we go. Nope. There we go. So the acts of notaries public that worked in Quebec, that is perhaps the best source of information I found for social history. Like the church will tell you, yeah, people's occupations, the places where they lived, when they were born, when they married, when they died. That's about it. It's a lot of cool information, important information to draw the skeleton of your family tree. But how many cows did they have? How many pigs? When did they buy their plot of land? At what point did 70-something-year-old couples decided to retire from active life and pass a family farm to the next generation? This is where you're going to find it, by looking at notarial records from Quebec. And you'll see the first one at the top, 16 million records. And these have barely been touched. Partly because people don't know about it, partly because potentially of the algorithms within Ancestry where these are not the items that typically pop up at the top of a search. But it's incredibly rich in information. So I'll give an example here.
Can I ask you a quick
please,
question?
yes.
How did you get it to know you were looking in Quebec?
It did not.
It just...
So
because I saw you type in notaria.
Yeah, exactly. And it's partly, like there's Luxembourg, and it's just because that's the only
Gotcha.
search term that matches the collections. On the US side, we might find similar information if you type deeds or contracts or wills. This is kind of a grab-all or catch-all term that will include wills and testaments, deeds, contracts, land sales, you name it. And it's partly because of the, I guess, judicial system in Quebec, how it's organized. So they all end up in some of these notaries' public records. So I'll give an example here. We know that.
I'm sorry.
No, it's good to see somebody happy. prefer that than seeing somebody sad, no?
Sure.
There's a lot of information. It's overwhelming.
Mine's already home.
Yeah. So again, speaking of this being potentially a 15-week, class or series, it could easily be even more than that. So I'll give an example. One of the first pelletiers in our region is Joseph Pelletier. And actually there are a lot of different pelletiers who come who are distantly related. Like oftentimes with some families, it's just like the 5 brothers come all at once. And they work on certain pieces of land and eventually they buy their own plots and they establish their own families. With the pelletiers, it's like cousins or second cousins that tend to come roughly within the same years. So one of these figures is Joseph. There had to be a Joseph in the family, probably more than one. And so he died in or around 1840. All right, I'm going to give it a small margin here, just in case. He wrote his will maybe a few years before he passed away, or maybe the will was processed after he passed away. So we'll give it a small margin. And again, this is kind of what I was saying earlier about not putting too much information, otherwise we're not going to get any results. Not just good search results, any results at all. So I'm going to click on search. And then we have a lot of folks here all by the same name. And you see the types of records. You have wills and testaments, proxies, leases, there are probably land sales. Yeah, there's a sale there. So it seems as though the one we're looking for, who died in 1840, is probably the second one. He writes a will, and it's signed by the notary in January of 1840. And we know that a lot of families that came to our region were from Kamouraska. And that's true of the Beaulieu and the Deschênes and a lot of the other
The
families.
ones too.
Yeah. So I'm going to click on him. And so we know that he signed his will January 16, 1840. The notary was a Beaulieu, of course. Who else? And here you'll notice that very often on Ancestry, they don't have the full deeds or contracts or wills. What they have is an index. So this image right here, I can click on it. It'll just show that in 1840, these are the separate contracts that were signed by the notary, Alexis Beaulieu. So this is a testament, the first one, of Dominique Cahouette. There's a marriage, verification possibly, cautionnement, cautioning, bail. It means something in French, it's not. They were getting bailed out of jail. And then we finally see here the testament of Joseph Pelletier, and also right underneath, with these marks, the testament of Madeleine Leclerc, épouse de Joseph Pelletier, of Madeleine Leclerc, the spouse of Joseph Pelletier. Now again, I mentioned that unfortunately Ancestry doesn't have the full records, but that's where yet another website comes in, and we are jumping around a little bit, but that's what we have to do to get to the original source. So that's where we're going to go to the site of the BANQ, Bibliothèque et Archives Nationales du Québec, which is kind of like our national archives here in the States. They have a lot of information, and if you type in, and this is one of the links I sent by email, so don't worry about putting this down. I don't know what all of this is, but you can go to numerique.banq.qc.ca, that's in the email, and that's how you can access some of these records. Now unfortunately, because again it's millions and millions of records, they haven't all been individually indexed on this site. So you can't just write Joseph Pelletier and suddenly get the right act. So that's part of the challenge. That's partly why we went to Ancestry first, because it tells us exactly where in the notary's collection it's located. It's, I can go back here, it's Acts number 8 and 9, and it's on January 16th, 1840. And we know that the notary is Alexis Beaulieu. So we're going to go here, and the way you search is by the notary's name. So we're going to put in Beaulieu, and here in the drop-down menu, luckily in this case it's the first one. Again, this is all French, but you should be able to recognize Notaire, or Archives of Notaries. So I'm going to click on that, and we'll hope that we have an Alexis Beaulieu. Oh, sure enough, at the top. So that's our notary, and we'll see whether his entire collection of papers, including the will and testament of Joseph Pelletier, is in there. So this looks a lot like what we had on Ancestry. It says répertoire, which is basically an index, and you see it starts in 1833, 34. But luckily we have this menu that's popped up on the right under Fichier, which means folders, and it has the chronological index, which is what Ancestry used to upload all that information. But then it also has more than 6,000 pages of acts, of deeds, of sales, and so forth. And then you can see it's broken down by dates. And we know that ours was in January 1840, so just want to make sure you click on the right time frame. close this window now that we have the right set of documents. And this is Act number 1. And based on ancestry, it was, I'll have to go back here. Oh, it was Acts 8 and 9. Yeah. So we'll go here. And a lot of these acts, these testaments, these documents are multiple pages. Oftentimes they do inventories when somebody dies, and it's pages and pages of everything they had in their household. So sometimes you'll have like 15 pages just for a single specific contract or act or inventory. So I'll just move a little bit further along here. Let's see if around page 20 we'll find, oh, this is Act number 6. Go a little bit further. Let's see. This is January 15th. Oh, look at that. That's Act number 8. I'll pull it up here. So, January 16th, 1840, Testament of Joseph Pelletier. And again, a lot of this is kind of rote or formulae. So it says, before the notary public for the province of Lower Canada, as Quebec was then known, undersigned, were present the following witnesses, témoins witnesses, hereafter named and undersigned. And then, I won't read the entire thing, I promise, I think it's multiple pages, but it does say, was present, Sir, Mr. really, Joseph Pelletier, former cultivator or farmer, residing at Rivière-du-Loup, Comté de Rimouski County, Saint-Esprit, sound of mind, memory, entendement or reasoning, sound judgment, as he appeared before us, the notaries of the province, and the following witnesses, hereafter named. And then he goes on to state exactly what he wants from his legatees. So here's bullet point 1. I recommend mon âme, my soul. Then we'll go to the next page. Adieu to God, I recommend my soul to God. So that's the first item in the testament. Essential for, good, pious Catholics in 19th century Quebec. And then there are different measures that indicates like what he expects from, in terms of how his property is going to be divided between his children, what's going to come of his body. It says that, Je veux et je désire qu'au jour de mon décès, I wish and desire that on the day of my passing, mon corps, my body, be interred in the cemetery of the parish where I shall die, and that that a mass be told, soit dit, chanté, solemnisé, that it be sung, solemnized by the Catholic Church. So there's a lot here. So this is page 2. This is.
Where did those papers stay forever? I mean, that was in the parishes?
You mean
All this
these?
stuff, where did it come from?
So from the notary's personal archives, and typically once a notary retires from public life, from his profession, or dies, the papers go to the government, and they're given over as public archives, and those remain accessible publicly. It's just that typically, or at least until recently, you had to physically go to like official archives in Quebec. But they've been in the process of digitizing all of these, and it's not complete. You'll see sometimes you'll enter the name of a notary in that search bar, and nothing will come up. They're still in the process of adding a lot of information, but there's a lot from every region in Quebec. Yeah. So anyway, this is page 4, just to give you a sense of how much information there is on this. Page 5, page 6, or maybe that was 4 and 5, 6 and 7, signed by Alexis Beaulieu at the end. And this is interesting here. Normally this would be where Joseph signed, but it says his mark. So he couldn't sign, and he just put his little mark to show that he was confirming or assenting to all these, the stipulations of his will and testament. And then I think I saw on Ancestry that his wife had also signed a testament. Yeah, so that's exactly what we have next. Testament de Marguerite Leclerc, or it says MAG, maybe it was Madeleine Leclerc, épouse de Joseph Pelletier. So then on the same day, she also writes her final will and testament. So this is just a sense of what's on there. I'll just give you two further quick examples. If I could, I'd keep you all here all night, but you may have other plans. So I'll just give you a few more examples of things that do appear in these contracts. And these are from my own family history. And one is in French, one is in English. I'll just blow this up for your sake. June 28, 1815, the inventory of the goods, l'inventaire des biens, dépendant de la communauté. Here, communauté is the community of marriage. So once the two parties were married, like all their goods were brought into a single community in legal jargon. And this was for Pierre Saint-Chagrin. Pierre Saint-Chagrin had passed away, and they were compelled by law to do an inventory of everything that now belonged to the widow, so that she might resolve debts and care for the children who were now without a father. So they had to make sure that economically the community was still sound, if you will, economically. And Marie Miville, she went by Mainville, but her original name was Miville, so she's a distant relative of all the Deschênes that we have in this region. So it goes into the detail about the stipulations in the marriage contract that was signed only 4 years ago, or 4 years prior when they were married. And then it gets into the inventory. So you have, I can't remember exactly, maybe 8 pages of things that were in the house. So I'll just give you a few examples here. So, our seau, a bucket. Here I see something cuillère, 6 cuillères.
Oh my God.
6 spoons. Every single item in the household. You can reconstitute your ancestors' entire households doing this. And this is just one example from my family. 3 fourchettes, 3 forks. Yeah. Une marmite, a big une marmite. What's that?
Is it a cooker? A big
A cooker, yeah, a big pot.
Big pot.
Instant pot, yeah.
I don't think so.
Thought I'd throw that.
Une hache, an axe. Yeah. Fer à chevaux, horseshoes. Yeah.
I don't think they played horseshoe with them, huh?
No. No, that's right. So we can go on, and I found this recently, and I was really interested to see what was of the greatest value. So, and they give you the value. They had 2 local people of, upstanding reputation, who could be relied upon, who knew the community, who knew what this would fetch at an auction. And they're the ones, these 2 gentlemen, who came into the household, saw every single good, and they were the ones deciding what their value was.
Is that why they were doing it, to sell it?
In some cases, because if they had racked up a lot of
You'd think
debts,
it was her business to take care of her family.
you would think, but not in this era, unfortunately. So you see the value of all these different things. This is pretty valuable. So this is 60 pounds, and that's our poêle à fond, cast iron stove. That was one of the most valuable things they had. And I think I found a few items that were more valuable a little bit further down. I don't know. Oh yes, right here. 135 pounds and 109 pounds. So these are the most valuable goods belonging to the community of marriage. Anyone Can anyone read that? Or Shabbat.
Yeah,
Oh,
a horse.
A horse.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. So 2 horses here.
It's cochon.
Oh yeah, scotchon, little pigs, piglets.
Trois lièvres.
Yeah.
Trois lièvres. After
Here?
it's cochon.
Oh,
After it's
estimé
cochon.
3 livres, 3 pounds.
Right.
Ah,
They were little.
dit, je pensais que c'était des
Dit
lièvres.
cochon.
Trois lièvres.
Yeah.
Comment on dit, c'est possible.
Yeah. So it's incredible, and you can do that for
But that's
like
interesting.
any of your ancestors who lived in Quebec up until like the 20th century. Chances are they do have records just like that. Yeah. Another example, most of these again are in French, but for some reason one of my Lacroix ancestors, well actually I know the reason, it's partly because he signed a contract with an Irish dude, Caravan, Thomas Caravan, who was not quite fresh off the boat, but was originally from Ireland, had grown up in Ireland, and they had a land sale. So I guess the default language, if there was somebody who was speaking English, still the case today, everyone speaks English. So they signed the contract in English, and this was a land sale. And my ancestor bought a certain number of cows, and as part of the deal, until he actually took ownership, he had to take good care of the cows and milk them, and make sure that while it was still the other person's property, while he was still leasing, technically, that everything stayed in proper order. So it's all laid out exactly how he's supposed to take care of the cows and the land and take care of the tools and make sure they're not all rusted out and so forth. So all that information again is just supplementing the bare bones, the skeleton that we have in a lot of these different church records for the most part, or census records. There are agricultural census records, 1861, 1871. Past that, I don't think there are any really. So they're great to get a glimpse of life in the 1850s, 60s, 70s. Past that, it's a little bit more difficult, and you have to turn to, this gold mine, really, it's not much of a challenge, really. If you know where to access the information, once you know that you have to search by notary instead of by the actual person, if you have the exact date, you do have to finagle here, you have to play around to get the exact page number. Sometimes you'll go to 400 and you're like, oh, it's too late, you have to go back 300, no, you have to go back to 328, and then you hit the right act. But that's part of the fun, and at least typically, once you get to that point, you know the act exists. So there's a payoff. It's like you just have to be patient, and you'll get there and find out about, the number of pigs and hares and buckets they had.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
amazing.
So thanks to you now, I'm gonna go home and clean.
Yeah.
Like a bad man.
No, you gotta write it down.
No, some of the stuff I don't want
Yeah, no
written down.
paper for that.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
We'll be judicious about who we send, exactly. The 2 trusted gentlemen from the community who are willing to turn a blind eye.
That's
Yeah.
interesting. I know that my ancestry went to Kamouraska or somewhere, and I look it up, Kamouraska, I might find
Yeah.
their name wrong. Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, we can help you with that. So there's one site we haven't talked about, which is Wikitree, but it's almost 7:30. I don't want to keep you all night, especially if we're all going to be shoveling tomorrow morning. So maybe we can save that one for another time, if you're interested.
That'd be nice.
Yeah, glad to do that.
So how many weeks does this last? As much as we want?
For as long as people keep coming back, we'll open up and we'll keep holding these. Especially if there are questions you think about tomorrow, you send us an email and we're like, oh yeah, we didn't touch it on that, or we didn't talk about this specific aspect. And again, these are just a few of the collections or databases that exist out there, so this could keep going on, maybe indefinitely. But yeah, next time we can talk about Wikitree and go into greater detail with some of these, or we can take some examples if you're willing to bring in an example from your family. We can do a deeper dive and kind of apply what we learned tonight. Again, I've been talking a lot. Questions?
You've answered a lot of them as you were going on, so.
Good.
There's a lot to remember. So
Yeah.
is it next week? Will we meet again?
It probably won't be next week, but January, perhaps? Yeah.
Excellent.
You're gonna send us an email. I didn't get the site I didn't get that.
Oh, well, I'll take your email. It might just
Yeah.
be that I didn't have it, but I'll take it down.
Okay.
Yeah, that way we can.
Well, you
share it.
answered me, so you must, when I requested,
Yeah.
you answered me, so you must have my email.
Oh, okay, so maybe I just forgot
You
to
answered me.
add it. So,
It's a lot.
yeah. Anyway, we can, I'll just check in a moment. Yeah.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. Well, great. Thank you,
So-
everyone.
So
Yes.
you'll get in touch with us through email?
Yeah, if
When
that
the
works
next
for
group-
everyone. And Rita, I have your email, so you can pass the word around, and
Yes.
yeah,
Yeah.
great. Yeah, I'll be glad
Very
to do that.
interesting.
Yeah. And until then, you'll have to come back next time and tell us about what you've been finding in the intervening time.
Uh-huh.
How many buckets we can have, see which of our ancestors had the most buckets in their household.
We have deeds in our, the safe at home that when her grandfather had bought the farm and all that, and when they sold it to her father, passed it on or whatever, and they indicated what they were what was in the house, what they were leaving them, and what they had to do. They had to take care of the grandmother for as long, and they had to get her a pair of new shoes every year. And they indicate, I thought that was so funny because they indicated that make sure she had everything she needed.
Yeah.
And it was right in there.
That's nice.
Yeah.
It was like, oh my gosh, you'd think that they'd take it for granted, that they'll take care of their mother and leave it at that, but no.
Yeah.
Grandma must have had something to do with that too. She probably bought new shoes every Easter.
And that's very common in Quebec. Usually once people reach, maybe 65, 70, all depending on what their state of health is, they essentially retire. They pass the farm on, but then they sign a deal
They
with...
live there too,
Yeah,
on that farm.
yeah, but like the property typically goes to the next generation, but then in exchange, the deal is, and oftentimes you'll see, they have to supply the parents or the elderly parents with like a cord of wood every month during the winter, or a barrel of salt pork every year on Christmas. I've seen that as well. So it goes in. You're absolutely right. It goes into
I
great
can't remember
detail.
everything that was there, but I had a good time reading it. So
Yeah.
It's been a while.
Yeah, and it gives you a glimpse of what they were eating, what they were doing, the amount of cloth and clothing in the household. It's neat. Yeah.
It's very interesting.
Yeah.
Well, thank you.
Of course. Thank you all. So thank you for being here, and we'll find a date for January.
Yes.
Which way? No, I have to know.
Yeah.